All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 19 of the Snake in the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Vines. You can find me on Twitter at jsnake_DFF. In this episode, I have John Hogue coming on the podcast. You should be following him on Twitter at Superflex Dude. He is the host of the Superflex Show, writer for DLF, and co-host of the FF Mercs flagship podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about Superflex Dynasty strategy from the startup to the next offseason. So welcome, John. How are you doing?
It's Mr. Snakes. Thanks for having me, man. It's awesome to be here with you and get to see close up what you're getting into. I was excited to see you get started on a podcast, so it's awesome to be here.
Thanks for coming on. Yeah, it's good to have you on. I have a couple of people coming on to talk some Superflex Dynasty strategy, and I know that a lot of people, if they follow you on Twitter, we talked about this before the show, they consider you more of a radical for Superflex. And I'm really I really want to talk through your process because you're on part 5 of your series for DLF right now about Superflex, correct?
Yeah, 5 just came out. I've got one more. Part 6 comes out next week where I talk about the full roster build, pull everything together and say, this is what a QBX strategy looks like, where you've got the most value and you've got production that can actually help you compete. So, it does. For whatever reason, it still is considered radical, but even though the reality is that entire series of articles has really just kind of laid out why not only is this not radical, this is actually this is the path of least resistance in Superflex. This is a way to do it in a way that makes sense and just kind of allows for, Superflex to do what it does.
Yeah, and I would recommend anybody who can check out the article on DLF to definitely check out all of the articles. I've been reading through them as they coming out, and it's been helping me rethink some strategies that I've created over the last couple months because I've been trying to change how I look at Superflex and playing around with the idea of like going more win now versus not, but we'll get into that in just a moment. There's one question that I do ask every guest, and that is, what is one hobby that you really enjoy doing that does not relate to fantasy football?
Man, and that's a kind of tough one because I've got a lot of them. I'm going to throw 2 at you, but I'll keep them brief. So I mentor entrepreneurs. I've started a couple of my own businesses and taken kind of the process that I used and have helped. At this point, I'm almost up to double digits. I want to say 8 or 9 different entrepreneurs. Helped mentor them through the business launch process, and I actually use that quite a bit in my fantasy football analysis. And then I'm also a musician, a singer. I play the guitar as well. I write songs, but primarily a singer. And I don't use that in fantasy football. No one has heard me sing in fantasy football.
I think it's time for you and Stompy to do a song on FF Mercs. I think that's what everybody needs.
He has absolutely no. He would be so off pitch. It would just be him yelling, and it's like, that doesn't even sound good. It just
maybe y'all can make the 2021 Scott Fishbowl anthem. Maybe that's what we need, because I know Stompy went a little crazy for Scott Fishbowl with his antics that he did.
Oh yeah, definitely, always. Yeah, if I'm wearing the belt, then maybe him and I will be able to put something. Although if I'm wearing the belt, I don't think he's going to be talking to me.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to take the belt away from both of y'all, but I'm only in my first year, so I'm just hoping for a good time. So we'll just see how it goes. So I wanted to start the podcast talking about your pinned post on Twitter, which you have it called the Superflex theorem. And it is, if the QB startup ADP is within 2 rounds of the non-QB, the QB's post-startup value will be equal to or greater than that of the non-QB. 2-round scarcity bump for quarterbacks after the startup. Give them the bump during the startup instead.
Yep. Yeah. Which, that's really, so we always say quarterbacks are the cheapest, after or in the startup draft. And, this is really just kind of a way of quantifying it. This is saying like, this is essentially us saying, this is how much cheaper quarterbacks are if you take them in a startup than if you wait until after the startup and try and trade for them. It's a 2-round difference. And really, I mean, you go back and look at your startup draft in a Superflex Dynasty and, look at a quarterback that was taken. I mean, really in any round, it works better in the later rounds. It's a little hard to give Pat Mahomes a 2-round bump when he's already, going top 3. But, for like in the later rounds, like use Phillip Rivers as an example with, I believe, a 10th round ADP, if I remember right.
That's about right.
Yeah. So, if you go back and look at your draft board and you see Phillip Rivers taken in the 10th round, then you start looking at the other players, the non-quarterbacks around him, and you say, which of these guys would I trade Phillip Rivers away for straight up? And usually it's going to take you're going to have to back up a round or two before you finally get to a guy, somebody that was probably taken in the 8th round, where you finally say, all right, that's where I would trade Phillip Rivers straight up. And the reason for that is just because in the startup, all these quarterbacks are available. We have this mindset of abundance. We have this mindset that all of these quarterbacks are available to me. I don't have to take one right now. Once you get out of the draft, though, and realize that you need quarterbacks and there's none available other than to trade, now it's basic economics. It's supply and demand. The demand is far greater than the supply at that point. The only way to get a quarterback is to buy one. And if there's only one team that can afford to trade away that quarterback, that team they don't have to compete with any other sellers, so they get to set the price. And the price is going to be, whatever they actually value that quarterback at. And it's going to be usually a 2-round bump.
Yeah, and there was one draft I was in. It's actually my newest home Dynasty league. A group of friends and I got together, made a league, and it's Superflex. And they did not value the quarterback at all, to where I ended up with 7 quarterbacks and then traded one away. Nice. So now I still have 6. So this actually fits with your theorem perfectly.
Yeah.
And for your example of 2-round bump, Jimmy Garoppolo was picked at the beginning of the 8th. And then Adam Thielen went at the beginning of the 6th. So yeah, I think straight up Jimmy Garoppolo for Adam Thielen. Another one's like Dwayne Haskins for Denzel Mims. I know a lot of people don't like Haskins, but if you need a QB, you need a QB. So yeah, I like it. So we're going to go ahead and dig straight into your startup strategy, which I know we just talked about it right now with that 2-round bump for QB. But my first question is, do you draft to win now, go to more of a productive struggle, or somewhere in between?
I think that an outsider looking at my startup roster would feel like it's going to take a productive struggle approach. It is going to be heavy on quarterbacks, and I prefer the younger ones because they're going to hold their value longer. And, I'll have probably some younger wide receivers, and it's kind of the same thing. I like having those positions locked up because I don't like having a lot of wide receivers. There's not a whole lot of variance from one wide receiver to the other. They still hold their value for a significant amount of time. The only thing that really takes them off the field, which is the only thing that takes away their fantasy relevance, is injury. So even if they're not a very good player, like Corey Davis is still fantasy relevant because he's on the field. He's not particularly good, but he's at least on the field. There's always a chance for him to catch a touchdown and score you fantasy points. So Corey Davis is still a fairly stable asset, all things considered. But and then you see a lot of running backs, and they're not all that good. But I've got a lot of them. I've got some that are good at catching passes. It really kind of becomes a little bit of a modified 0 RB approach. And to compensate for that, I end up with good PPR guys. Last year, Austin Eckler, this year, James White, and Boston Scott. Those are going to be guys that I end up with a lot of. I don't have the big flashy names. And so people look at it and say, yeah, that team he's playing for 2021.
Yeah.
And the truth is, that is somewhat true. My quarterbacks and my wide receivers are going to carry me through to 2021. And then I'm going to start adding, running backs in the rookie draft. But the thing is with running backs, especially, is they turn over on a weekly basis. It's not even a yearly thing with those guys. It's freaking weekly. Last year we had, guys like Raheem Mostert come out of nowhere. We had Kenyon Drake come back from the dead. We had, before him, we had spurts with Chase Edmonds. We had all these different guys come along who were, either super cheap in trade, late in the draft in startups, or sometimes even off of waivers. We got some of these guys, and they helped you win championships. So, I don't think that you have to have stud running backs to win a championship. And for that reason, if I've got the right mix of running backs and I've got enough of them that I can take all the shots that I need, I'm still going to be competitive for that season. So it's still a win now approach. It just doesn't look like it.
Gotcha. So it's, I guess I would call it a productive struggle with a chance for win now if some
Yeah.
of those running backs start to hit, or they just have their PPR upside, which I'd say like James
Yep.
White's a good example of guy with PPR upside. Same with Boston Scott, because according to one of my more recent drafts, James White went in like the 10th or 11th round. So is that usually where you get your first running back typically?
Well, so like I said, I do kind of a modified zero RB. So the big thing with quarterback extreme, that's my strategy, where you're taking quarterbacks early and often. Usually I want 3 quarterbacks in the first 4 rounds, but that 4th pick in the first 4 rounds is usually going to be a running back. And the reason for the big reason for that is I know that those guys, first of all, I know that they've got a chance to kind of, any one of those guys outside of the first round has a chance to return first round type value by next season. Leonard Fournette for me is a great one. You get him in the 3rd round, he's got a shot to be the RB1 overall, just based on, the amount of usage that he got versus the number of touchdowns he scored in 2019. Even just a regression to a mediocre, middle of the road scoring rate is going to put him in the conversation for RB1 overall. So, he can help me win from the 3rd round. That's my 3rd pick. And then the other thing that I can do with him is potentially package him with a quarterback for, a downgraded quarterback in trade and an upgrade at running back. All of a sudden, I package Lamar Jackson and Leonard Fournette, and I get back, a young quarterback that I like Drew Lock. I'm getting literally any running back I want.
Yeah.
I'm getting back Christian McCaffrey in that deal if I want him, So that's kind of the big reason I do it. I really like the trade value of running backs. I just don't value them, as part of the foundation of my team. But I will end up with at least one of those type of guys.
And I think that's a great point, because that's one thing. I did 2 drafts that I would consider productive struggles, in that I went for draft capital, and I went one of them I went really QB heavy. The other one I didn't really go as much QB heavy. I went more receiver heavy, but I didn't draft a running back until the 9th round. And I realized it was 2 months ago, probably a month from today, that I made a fatal mistake by not getting one of those top end guys, because it's so hard to trade for them unless, like you said, you could do like a quarterback sort of package deal. But if you don't have one of those top end guys like a Leonard Fournette, one person that I was counting on in both of those leagues was Darius Geis, and we all know what happened with that. Yeah, it didn't work out well for me. And so it's very important that if you are going to do some type of productive struggle and you have to start two RBs, and this is something Rob McDowell has mentioned also, is get one of those running backs. You need at least one decent guy, and Leonard Fournette is a great example. Like, he, in some drafts, will go in the late thirds, early fourths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the third round, but yeah, I mean, you still want to take advantage of that value. A big part of what we're trying to do in the startup is, for the quarterbacks, that just gets us into the trade market. Then the running backs give us extra currency. And they also unlock a little bit of trade value that the quarterbacks have. It allows the quarterbacks to carry more of the trade value, more of the weight, more of the water in a trade, in trade negotiations, because, the Superflex theorem, what that essentially is, what that's really telling us is you probably are not going to be able to afford to trade for a quarterback.
Yep.
They after the startup, when there's none available, a quarterback is just way too hard to attain. Not many people do it. Not many people trade for a quarterback without sending one, back the other way. So, what we know about quarterbacks, though, is on a weekly basis, they all score roughly the same. So, the deep, dark secret that a lot of people still haven't quite caught on to is the fact that you can downgrade from your quarterback, whoever it is. You can downgrade from Pat Mahomes to, Derek Carr, and you're still only giving up about 10 points. But if you do it in a package deal where you're also giving up, a running back, really any running back, and then upgrading from that running back to another running back, the quarterback power in that trade is going to be so much greater than their actual production. Their value is so much greater than the actual production. But the problem is, in order to make a move like that, you kind of have to include some other players to do it. So, that's where I still like to load up on running backs. I don't like a bunch of the big flashy names, but I like enough running backs that I can make some moves with them and really take advantage of that quarterback value.
Yeah, and that's a good point with quarterbacks, because that is true that all of them are about the same. And would you say that most of dynasty value for quarterbacks is their longevity? So someone like a Patrick Mahomes, a Lamar Jackson, they're most likely going to score like 2 to 3 points per game more-ish on average. But then someone like a Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, even like a Josh Allen, they're all scoring around the same points. And would you say it's more just that, what would I call it? A projected longevity is their value?
Yeah, I do think that that's a big part of it. I think that, at least in theory, I mean, Pat Mahomes just signed a 12-year contract, and right now he's already in the conversation for 1.01. So in theory, at the very least, you can, you got Pat Mahomes at 102 in your startup. McCaffrey went 101. You can, after the draft, at the very least, you can trade Pat Mahomes straight up for Christian McCaffrey. That's going to be the case for the next 12 years. It's not going to be Christian McCaffrey every year. That name is going to change every year. It's going to be Pat Mahomes and blank as the top two names in Superflex startups every year for the next 12 years. So Pat Mahomes is going to be the constant. And at any point through those 12 years, you can cash him in for, the current big name running back, whoever that is. At some point, it's probably going to be, Jonathan Taylor. At some point, it's probably going to be Miles Sanders. At some point, it's probably going to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. At some point, it's probably going to be Travis Etienne or Chuba Hubbard. And then there are guys that that we haven't even heard of yet, who are going to come along here in about 8 years and just have a massive RB1 overall season, in their second year as a pro, and they're going to be the new 1.01 in Superflex, and Pat Mahomes is still going to be 1.02, and you can still trade him straight up for that guy who was just born, 5 years ago. We're still going to be able to trade for that guy with Pat Mahomes just straight up. So yeah, so much of their value is based on the fact that, even when you're playing in that 2 to 3 year window that people like to say, you still have that value with Pat Mahomes for as long as you have him.
Yeah, Christian McCaffrey is the one guy who I have a weakness for. I have this feeling that he's that special outlier. And I know that's a scary thing to say and to get into, but I just think that he provides that bonus at running back, and we can look at it 2 years from now, and we're probably saying that about Todd Gurley a couple years ago. So I may be a dummy for saying that, but if I had the 1.01, I'm still taking CMC, but I do agree though, like 5 years down the road, CMC isn't going to be the 1.01, while Patrick Mahomes, he'll most likely be the 1.02. So
yeah,
that is a great point.
Yeah, I mean, Christian McCaffrey won't make it back to where he's at right now. Probably never again, to be honest with you. That doesn't mean he has to lose a ton of value, though. I mean, he could still be a first rounder next year. It's just, yeah, I mean, somebody's going to replace him is the RB1 overall, both in production and in value. So, but again, yeah, it's about just kind of the timeline that you have with Pat Mahomes and the ability to cash him in.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we're going to switch to in-season dynasty strategy. And my question is, do you do anything unique in the season to set yourself apart in dynasty? Some examples could be trading for injured players or trading away vets on a hot streak.
Not a lot of that. One thing that we do at the Superflex Super Show, and I definitely implement it myself. But so every week in this is just kind of a preview of what this season's going to be, third straight season, where the Superflex Super Show, we're going to have a show specifically every single week on either coming out like Monday night, Tuesday morning, something like that. It's called Superflex Standard Operating Procedures. And it's buys and sells, it's adds and drops. And then we've got a segment that we call Next Week, This Week. And basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the players who are free right now. You pick them up right now and you can get them for cheap or free. But next week, they're going to be the hot waiver wire ad, and they're going to cost a lot. So you pick them up a week early and save yourself some waiver money or waiver priority, whatever it is. And it really kind of gets me thinking in terms of, with the quarterbacks, like how close is this guy to losing his job? I think we're going to be watching Derek Carr quite a bit. And I think that we're going to, it's Marcus Mariota's on a lot of rosters, but I think at some point we're going to be wondering, like, when is this coming? This feels like it's coming soon. And I think there are going to be other situations like that. It certainly happens at running back. And it also kind of gets you thinking in terms of, what if this guy gets hurt? What if this running back gets hurt? Does it matter? Are we just going to see this running back by committee that we want nothing to do with? Are we going to get one guy, Jordan Howard gets hurt, and now all of a sudden Boston Scott comes in and is a major part of that offense? Kerryon Johnson gets hurt, and now all of a sudden Bo Scarborough is going to come in and carry the load all by himself. So we're kind of looking for that type of guy. That's really kind of the biggest thing I do. And I'm really focused on the running back position. And, so I guess the one other thing to add to that is that's where the QBX strategy of having, enough quarterbacks that you can sustain injuries and bye weeks. That's where that's so effective, is because it allows you to focus in season on running backs and, continuing to churn those guys, continuing to find the guys off of waivers who are going to keep helping you.
Yeah, that's a good point with keeping the lookout for those potential risers. Like Boston Scott's an excellent example from last year. He absolutely
Mhm.
killed it. He, if you ignore that Miles Sanders didn't play much of Week 17, he actually had more fantasy points than Miles Sanders did, weeks
Mhm.
11 through 17. Which Miles Sanders did only play 30% of the snaps, but still, that's a crazy amount of points for a backup player, a third string player at the start of the season.
Yep. Yeah, he was startable. Once he carved out that role, he helped them come from behind and beat the Giants in, week 13, I believe it was, and kept them in the playoff hunt. And from then on, he was a major part of that offense, and he was startable in dynasty or in fantasy leagues every single week.
Yeah. My next question about in-season strategy is around what week do you look to make a push for the championship or look to sell vets because you realize it isn't going to be your year?
Um, that's tough. I mean, I I sometimes I think you just know, by in the first like 3 weeks or something, you can tell like, all right, this is not going well. I mean, so I think it's important to be, to be fair about it sometimes. Like, there are a lot of people who drafted Saquon Barkley with, one of the top 2 picks in their startups. Especially in redraft when quarterback is not nearly as much of a priority even in Superflex. But somebody got Saquon Barkley. He's got a dreadful start to the season as far as his schedule goes. And he's got like San Francisco and Pittsburgh and maybe Chicago. I don't even remember the schedule, but it's awful to start the season. And I think that it's still valid for people to say, all right, like this can still turn around. This is still a very talented player. The schedule's going to loosen up and, this can still turn around. But at the same time, there are some other players that, by week 3, kind of regardless of the schedule, we're going to say, all right, he looks like crap. Todd Gurley looks really old. Le'Veon Bell just is not, they're just not giving him touches. They don't want, whoever it is. This is we can see that this is not going to happen. And I think that it's pretty important for people to be, extremely judicious about that stuff and to say, like, to be ultra realistic about it and say, this is a weak spot for me, and obsess over fixing it. And if that means bailing on your season because, this is just, you're not going to get anything from that player. That's just not going to happen this year. If that means bailing on your entire season, then do that, because the biggest mistake that people make is they start off with all the writing on the wall and they continue to tinker as if they're going to be able to turn it around. And all that ends up happening is you end up just missing the playoffs and now you've got a later draft pick, and you did absolutely nothing for your team.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important to look at your teams as honestly as possible and to not start selling your draft picks too soon, because it may look nice and pretty that, oh, if I send this 2021 first for this running back, my season's going to be made. I'll be like a top 3 team. Well, if you're sending your 2021 first to be a top 3 team, you're already like a top 6 team right now. And if anything, I would look to get rid of a ton of players and go for that 1.01 in the rookie draft, because we know rookie fever. If you want to get a really good vet, you can get a really good vet for that price, or you can keep your pick and get an excellent prospect. You can get, if you need quarterbacks, Joe Burrow or Tua. If you need running backs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Jonathan Taylor. And to me, it's better to choose a side and to be very consistent with that and not try to rush your rebuilds. That's the worst thing. And I know everybody talks about it. I know you've mentioned it before. Don't rush your rebuild. Stay consistent with it. Set your plan. And even if it looks pretty, like you think you can make it, like for me, I rushed a rebuild. I rushed it back, and then Darius Geis ended up being who he is. And now I don't have depth. And so now I'm looking at my team a little bit different. I'm like, ooh, I should have really held off on that Rebo because I sent you're gonna not like this trade, but Dobbins, Stafford, and Eckler for CMC and Hines. And at the time, I was like, that makes me like a number one team. I'm good to go. And then it's a start 11, 12 team league. And I'm looking at it now and I'm like, that is one of the worst trades I've made on a dynasty roster construction term. And it's a learning point too. Like everybody's going to make mistakes, and just realize it. Don't just look at it with this googly eye of, oh, I'm going to be okay, I'll make it. So hopefully my team makes it.
Yeah.
we'll see. I'm still hoping.
Yeah. I do think that there's this really weird opportunity that 2020 and coronavirus is really going to create. And for one thing, it's going to create this massive split. But there's an opportunity on either side, because so we know that we're not going to get a whole lot of college football, if any, which means we're not going to get to see all these players. We've got these right now. These are mythological figures to us: Travis Etienne, Chuba Hubbard, Najee Harris, Rondale Moore and Jamar Chase and Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. These are all guys that have just kind of this mystique right now. What tends to happen is, ask Tua, this mystique wears off throughout the season, especially if you have a down year or you suffer a major injury. And, that mystique kind of wears off and their value wears off. And by the time our rookie draft gets here, it doesn't look quite as good as it did, back in November. And I think that this year we're without college football, without the opportunity for those guys to go out and, prove that we're overvaluing them. We're going to maintain that mystique. We're still going to have the mystique around all these players because we haven't seen anything to the contrary. So those rookie picks are going to be worth a lot more on the, so there's definitely an argument for not only keeping your own rookie pick, but loading up on other rookie picks because of the ridiculous amount of value that you're going to get out of those. But on the other side of that, there's also the piece where, if you are going to contend, you've got all these teams who are ready to bail on their season and really invest heavily in the 2021 rookie draft because of that value that they're going to get out of it. And all of a sudden your 12-team league becomes about a 5-team league. Your odds of winning that thing are quite a bit better. And your rookie pick, even though it looks like it's going to be a late one, all of a sudden has that much more, buying power. So it's going to make for interesting economics this year, I think, when it comes to the trade markets.
I agree. And one thing that'll be weird too is with the whole COVID thing, and we haven't seen teams have any players sit out with COVID recently. No one's been really sick. There was the thing with the testing center, but that all came back negative. So part of me is wondering if COVID's not going to be as big of an issue for the NFL as was originally thought. Now, there's always a chance that once they start traveling, obviously everything changes. And I do agree that I think if you can trade away your rookie pick to a team that is more of that bottom team and get a solid player, I could see teams jumping on the chance. I know people haven't talked about it as much because we're like 2 weeks from football season, but that was all the talk on Twitter about a month ago. I know I was posting all about it, about trying to do we need to start changing to where we trade away those older pieces like a Todd Gurley for a David Montgomery, trying to get that more stable asset because we don't want to lose a year. And that was one thing with like a league that I had recently drafted. We had voted early on that we were going to completely redraft the league. And I know some people may say it's Dynasty. Why would you do that? And to me, you're not drafting Tom Brady now for 2021. You're not drafting Drew Brees for 2021. And it changes the value of some players. And some people argued with me and disagreed. But that was my viewpoint. And I agree. I think it's a good point that if you can get a good price for your draft pick, go for it. If you can get a good price to acquire a draft pick, even if you're a contending team, it may be a good idea to send James Conner for a 2021 first if someone will do it. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you can even kind of frame it a little bit. I mean, I don't love doing sales pitches when I'm trying to trade. I think that the assets should really kind of speak for themselves. But, in this case, I think that you can kind of point out like, first of all, we know how deep this class already is, how deep this class is already going to be, but we also, I mean, at least this is kind of my hunch, and I think it's a fairly safe, educated guess here more than anything. Is I think we're going to see a lot of. We're not going to see very many players return to school the way we usually do. A lot of them they're have gonna it's gonna have been a full year and since they've played football and they're just kind of done sitting around waiting, you know. I don't think we're gonna see nearly as many players go back as usual. So I mean, you can really sell this is gonna be a super deep, super talented rookie class. I don't even though I'm on track to win the championship in this league, I look like the team that's best built to go win the championship. That 12th pick is still going to be better than, most 106s in most years.
Yeah, definitely try to get your sell pitches, everybody, because it people will listen, especially teams that are a little bit on one side or the other. Because that's one thing I think in season is you should really be looking closely at teams and seeing if they look like they'll be going towards a rebuild or going towards being a contender, and use that to your advantage.
Yep.
So now we're going to go to the off season. So this is why everybody loves Dynasty. This is why I love Dynasty. And I'm going to start with a question about how you set yourself up before the rookie drafts even get close. And that is, do you make any moves before the NFL free agency occurs to put yourself ahead? Like some examples from this last year could be trading for Teddy Bridgewater before he signed with the team, or even one trade I did is I traded away 2023s for Tom Brady. So it's
Yeah.
like, do you look to make any moves like that can help your team?
Yeah, definitely. And those are two great ones because, both of those guys were super cheap, Bridgewater and Brady. And I ended up in one league. I ended up, with them actually in with a bunch of analyst friends, in fact. But I ended up getting both Brady and Bridgewater. And I think it cost me a total of like 2 seconds or like a second and 2/3, something like that. It was insanely cheap. And so that's probably my favorite move is going after the quarterbacks who look like they've got a chance to to find a better situation or a starting job just kind of in general. Jameis Winston's going to be a great one to go after.
Cam Newton, maybe Cam Newton potentially.
Yeah, I think so. Philip Rivers might as well. He's on a 1-year deal with the Colts. It's there might be a lot of people writing him off, and then he might end up with another team, and I mean, maybe it's Tampa Bay, maybe it's New Orleans. It's entirely possible that he ends up in a very good offense, and all of a sudden, he has very high value. Nick Mullins is a guy that I've been really kind of stashing for several years now. Alex Smith, I think, could be a great one. And we'll see how the season plays out. That's where we'll really find those names. But find those guys, especially at quarterback, because that's where you can get a discount on these quarterbacks when you're picking them up before they have an actual starting situation. So
One I just thought of was Mitch Trubisky.
yeah, that could be a great one. He could be on his way out. Sam Darnold could be on his way. I mean, if the Jets it's the Jets and the Jaguars right now battling it out for the Vegas odds for lowest, over under win total. And both of those guys, honestly, if either of those teams end up drafting in the first or second overall, they're probably going quarterback. I don't know how you pass on those top two quarterbacks. So, if they do that, whoever gets Trevor Lawrence, the former starter, whether it's Sam Darnold, Gardner Minshew, like that guy's probably on his way out. His value is going to tank. And then, you pick him up in February, and then in March, he signs with a new team to become the new starter. And, he ends up in a situation kind of like Bridgewater did, where all of a sudden he's got weapons everywhere.
Yeah. Do you see Gardner Minshew being the starter for the Jags next year? Because I personally don't. And I find it, I don't know if he'll be a starter in the NFL next year. And I know he has the flash to him. He had the awesome video with, I think it was Bud Light today, which was really cool to see as a fantasy football player. But what do you see happening with him? Because he's been someone I've been fading pretty hard in Dynasty, but redraft him all in.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that the thing with that team is, like I said, Vegas has them at basically 4.5 wins is the over under. And I my bet would be that most of that money is going towards the under. But the big issue with that team is the defense. It's, they've lost all those guys that made them, one of the best defenses in the league. They lost basically all of Saxonville at this point. It's just they're young. They're somewhat talented, but they're just way too young. That defense is going to be the reason that they end up, with a top overall pick. But the offense, I think there's plenty of fantasy production there, and especially when they're chasing points, because their defense puts them in a bad spot all the time. So I'm with you 100%. I think Gardner Minshew is a great one for this year. I think they're going to be chasing a lot of points. I think that he's going to use Leonard Fournette a lot in the passing game. I think they're going to use Laviska Shenault as a little bit of a gadgety type of player. I think, they've got the tight ends, and they've got DJ Chark to be, kind of some red zone threats and deep down the field with Chark. And yeah, I think there's a lot there for Minshew, but I think that at the end of the day, this is going to be such a bad team that they're going to be in a position where, like, seriously, how do we stick with Gardner Minshew when we could have Trevor Lawrence?
Yep, in complete agreement. So now we're going to go to the rookie draft, and this is where you would get Trevor Lawrence in 2021. And I'm wondering, what is your philosophy on keeping rookie draft picks versus trading them for known players and using rookie fever to your advantage? And I would say this is more for like a 2020 discussion, not really a 2021 like COVID discussion.
Yeah. Leaving out 2021 in the fluky stuff that we're going to get out of that. But just kind of in general, I mean, the big thing is rookie picks, just they're so overvalued always. We're really not that good at making rookie picks. And at calling rookies correctly, at projecting rookies correctly. It's very rare that they end up being worth, what you actually have to pay to get the rookie pick. And, I think some of it is that there's still a wide range of outcomes. Somebody traded Ezekiel Elliott or Mike Evans for 1.01 in the offseason, for 2020 1.01. And I mean, that could have been Joe Burrow. It could have been Jonathan Taylor. It could have been Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And there's a certain amount of value in the fact that you have a choice between those three guys. But the problem is, at some point you have to make the pick. And that's where we're not all that good, actually. But we also get way too excited about, the unknown of it. Like I always kind of liken it to, having a present under the Christmas tree, that big wrapped monstrosity that you've had your eyes on for several weeks leading up to Christmas. The excitement of the gift itself has a lot more intrinsic value than what's actually inside the package. Once you take the wrapping off, then it's like, I mean, that's cool, but it's certainly not as cool as the excitement of coming downstairs every damn morning and seeing that big thing and wondering what is that and how's it going to change my life. So, that's kind of the way people feel about draft picks a little bit. And yeah, I fully capitalize on that. Take advantage of the fact that their value just keeps rising until they're on the clock, basically. And, there is an argument to be made to wait as long as you can to cash them in. But like I said, people were seriously trading away known elite players like Ezekiel Elliott, Mike Evans, Julio Jones. These were some of the guys that I saw. Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb. Like, I saw these guys getting traded away for the first overall pick in 2020. And I'm just like, I don't care what month it is. I'm making that trade, and I'm taking advantage of that right now.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one thing that I tried to do last year as much as I could, and then I got some FOMO like a couple months after the draft. But I haven't made any crazy trades for any rookies, so I'm holding strong on it. And I think it's a good thing that if anybody is doing a productive struggle, which if you haven't heard the term, typically that means you'll be trading back in the draft. You'll be getting more of the quarterback heavy approach if you're in Superflex, more wide receiver heavy approach, and you end up with 3 to 4 2021 draft picks or whatever year it is. Trade a couple of those for some known players. Don't just think that you're going to hit on them, because the odds are only half are going to hit. And I know I've talked to some people about 2020 class, and I think that they are special compared to other classes, and I think that they can hit at a higher rate. But that hit at a higher rate still only 60 to 75%. It's not that much higher.
Yeah, something like that. And the big reason that it is going to be so high, even that high, is because it's fairly heavy with running backs, because those are the guys that you find out right away. Typically, I mean, here's basically the career arc for the various positions. Running backs usually break out in year 1 or 2, and if it doesn't happen by year 2, like midway through year 2, it's never going to happen. So David Montgomery, like the clock is ticking, man. Wide receivers usually take until year 2 or year 3 to break out. And then the running backs, by the way, they break out in year 1 or 2, and then they peak the following year, and then they're there for like 2 years, basically. The wide receivers break out in year 2 or year 3, and then they peak the following year, and usually it lasts, like 5 years. Quarterbacks break out in year 2, peak in year 3, and then, it's 7 or 8 years, roughly. So, we usually don't know right away with quarterbacks and wide receivers. And it actually takes several years for us to figure out what we have. And by the time we know what we've got with those players, a lot of people give up on them. People have already given up on N'Keal Harry, and he's still well within his window for a breakout.
But, yeah, he's a great buy candidate, I think, especially with the negative top he keeps getting. I like that. So my last question stems from some conversations I've seen you have on Twitter, and that's related to rookie draft again. And with your teams typically being stacked at quarterback, would you still take a quarterback at the 1.01 in a Superflex draft, or would you instead grab would you take a quarterback at the 1.01, or would you instead grab a running back to help your team and fill the different holes that are made from how you draft?
Yeah, I'm usually taking running backs. Now, that's because I am, pretty set at quarterback. I'm usually 5 deep with, fairly young guys, fairly stable guys. So, I to a point where, I will know a year or 2 in advance when I need to restock at quarterback. So, if I had older guys on my roster, then maybe I would have took Joe Burrow just to, kind of stash him until, Phillip Rivers and Ben Roethlisberger retire. And now I need to actually bring up Joe Burrow into my rotation, but for the most part, so I'm going to see that coming, generally speaking. I am in a position where, I'm set at quarterback, and I can take running backs, and that's where I can really detail my roster by adding those rookie running backs. Like I said, they're going to break out in year one, maybe partway through year two, but either way, I've got the young quarterbacks, I've got the young wide receivers. All I need are some running backs. Jonathan Taylor's going to come in here in year one and break out for me almost immediately. And now this roster's complete, so for one thing, it's an argument in favor of QBX. But yeah, the other thing is it makes it so much easier to be able to draft a running back, even when there are those quarterbacks available. I'm going to miss on Trevor Lawrence a lot next year, because even if I have the ammo to get up to QB1, I just am not going to really need him. I'm going to be moving up because now I need running backs. That's all that this roster is missing. But, for everybody else who, if you only have 2 or 3 quarterbacks and one of them is kind of either getting old or about to lose his job, Derek Carr or Mitch Trubisky, guys like that, Gardner Minshew, like we said, if you've got those guys, you need to go quarterback. You need to take your medicine here.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely important to not get completely destroyed at the quarterback position. That's extremely important, and that's where the QBX strategy does come in. And it's definitely going to be one thing that I'm going to be excited to read your final article coming out here next week, and I'll be rethinking my strategy some, because I go back and forth between that whole go win now, more running back heavy, but then if you think about it as a dynasty, that's not going to hold long, and you'll be rebuilding after a couple years. So yeah, I'll have to definitely think about it. And I do want to thank you for coming on today, John. I had a blast. Do you have any projects or any other articles that you're currently working on?
Not really. I'm gonna wrap up this series, and then we'll just go through the season and learn what we can learn, and perfect our processes and as we go, and and then once the off season hits, I'm sure there'll be a lot more to talk about as far as Superflex strategy, but we're just so close to the season that right now it's all about in-season management. We're treating really most rosters just kind of like redraft. So not a whole lot to do right now, other than shift to that in-season focus. And yeah, that's kind of what we'll do. The one thing that I do work on year round though is Superflex ADP for dynastyleaguefootball.com. I run mock drafts, Superflex startup dynasty mock drafts, and open source those. So anybody who wants to jump in, please do. They're a lot of fun. It's a great way to keep up on Superflex values and help us build that ADP that goes on the website that to me is the strongest, cleanest ADP in the industry. So help us out with that. But Jacob, I appreciate you having me on, man. It was a lot of fun. And like I said, I was excited to be a part of the early stages of this podcast. It's one that I was excited to see start, and being here is a real treat.
Thank you, John. And I do recommend anybody to check out DLF. They do have fantastic ADP. I completely agree. I use it all the time, especially when I make Twitter threads, stuff like that. And also get involved with the mocks. You can do 1QB mocks with Ryan McDowell on Twitter, and John does the Superflex mocks. I've done both. I obviously prefer Superflex because that's how I end up playing and drafting. So
we need more help anyways, filling. Ryan fills those freaking one quarterback. I mean, he knows everybody. He's got, more followers than I could possibly count. So he fills those in a matter of minutes. But the Superflex ones, I don't have Ryan McDowell draw power. So I have to go around and beg all my friends to jump in. And you're always gracious enough to jump in, but let's get some more regulars in there too.
I agree. I definitely have had some new followers on Twitter that I think would really enjoy to do the mock. So I'll definitely be bugging them whenever the next mocks come up.
Nice.
So thanks for coming on again, John. Everybody go follow John on Twitter at SuperflexDude. Also make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the Snake in the Draft podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Let's be snakes this draft season.